The Dalai Lama was doing a lecture entitled A Human Approach to World Peace, which was organized by Presidency University. And Newsweek reports that he said the following about economics, quote, "We need a century of peace. I will not see this in my lifetime, but we must start working on it. Those below 30 are the generation of the 21st century. You have to stop violence with your will, vision, and wisdom. We must have a human approach. As far as socioeconomic theory, I am a Marxist. In capitalist countries, there is an increasing gap between the rich and poor. In Marxism, there is an emphasis on equal distribution." So, I actually really respect that he said this, because people who are really spiritual and religious, if they actually follow their different holy books, many of them advocate for communal-like systems, which are very similar to Marxism. Of course, they all came about, their religions came about before Marxism, but they advocate for similar systems. And, I mean, the New Testament is certainly a good example of this, and socially, the Bible is absolutely backwards, as we've gone over many times, but again, in the New Testament, economically speaking, it's certainly on that page. So in a way, the honesty, I think, is fantastic. But overall, do I agree with him? Not so much. Now, it's good that there are people out there to the left of me. In fact, Michael Moore's documentary, which is it again? Oh, Capitalism, A Love Story. Like, he has some great substance in there in terms of his critiques of the way the system works and just the facts about the bailouts and how screwed everything is and all that stuff. But in terms of his conclusions, I actually disagree with some of his conclusions. I think he's to the left of me. And when I hear the Dalai Lama say something like this, I also think he is to the left of me. But under Marxism, here's been my issue with Marxism. I mean, obviously, this is a really long conversation, one that you really can't do justice in a tiny segment in the middle of a radio show, but under Marxism, there's, of course, no state. The state essentially dissolves, and there's no classes, and there's no more private property. It's basically community ownership of everything. And at its core, what Marxism is, it's the implementation of the philosophy that we function in society from each according to his ability to each according to his need. Now, I think whenever you have a conversation about communism or Marxism, it's always like, oh yeah, in theory, nobody can disagree with it. Seriously, in theory, I don't think anybody in theory can disagree with it, because it's just the idea that, like, everything should be equal, we should all be fair about everything, there's community ownership of everything, and everybody gets paid the same, and there's like no difference between leisure and your work, and it's essentially a utopian society. But I don't think it's possible. I mean, that's always been my main disagreement, is that let's take it one by one here, to the idea that there's no state, that eventually it'll just dissolve through social movements. No, maybe I'm just more pessimistic on this, but I think that human nature will prevent that. And I think that it's not possible to have no class in the sense that everybody gets paid exactly the same, because then you've set up an incentive structure that doesn't coincide with our human nature. And the problem is, in my opinion, that Marxism assumes that, number one, human nature is more malleable than it is, right? That we can get to a point where we can have a system where we purely are benevolent and altruistic, and we can have, like, community ownership of everything. I don't think that's true. I think human beings are both things. We're both really greedy and really materialistic and really competitive, but we're also very cooperative and kind and sympathetic to people within our group, right? So we have both of those urges, and they're both natural, so why not set up a system that harnesses both of those things? So that's a failing, I think, of Marxism, that number one, it assumes human nature is more malleable than it is, and number two, it assumes that human beings are more rational than they are, that, like, we can internalize the principles of Marxism and then act in accordance with those principles, when I don't think that would work, because, again, I think what is innate in us would kind of butt heads with it, and it wouldn't allow it to happen. I forget who makes the point, but somebody has said that essentially Marxism is like trying to make the river flow in the opposite direction, right? So just flat out flipping human nature on its head, as opposed to a more socialist system or a social democracy, which is what I favor. It's like building dams and levees and shit to make the river, as it's flowing in the right direction, not go crazy, right? You make it so that you have harnessed human nature in that way. And also, I think that Marxism is too naive and idealistic in the sense that they really don't buy into the Hobbesian idea that we need a system of order to a certain extent. I think that they believe that organically we can arrive at this stateless utopian type system. But again, I disagree with that because I think that there is something in humans that kind of moves towards order, and we want peace. And on a certain level, it's almost like by any means necessary you want peace, right? Like everyone, if it's like a pure authoritarian society, obviously you see a backlash against that because there's too much control from above. But in any system that functions smoothly, it's almost like you have some form of hierarchy, even if it's a voluntary hierarchy. And even if it's, laws that are enforced in different branches of government. And, I mean, again, I always go back to the Scandinavian region where it is ordered, right? There is a system of order. There is a state. It's not like it's stateless. But what you have is a capitalist system mixed with a socialist system. It's a mix of government and capitalism. It's efficiently regulated capitalism, and it's taking certain things that are off and putting them off the table, those things being what would constitute your social safety net or your equal opportunity. So in order to have an equal opportunity at success, you need to have education, you need to have healthcare, you need to have daycare, you need to have infrastructure funded properly, you need to have housing. So you subsidize those things and you take them off the table. So you've given everybody an opportunity, but after you've given them an opportunity, then they say still, well, you're still a human, so there's still a competitive aspect to you, and there's still this thing of wanting to get material well-being. So after we've given you the equal opportunity, now you guys can compete to make more money and live whatever kind of life you want and buy a bigger house or whatever the case is. So I like the guy. I mean, I don't know what it says. There are probably very few people that don't like the Dalai Lama. I like the guy, but overall, I do think that there is such a thing as too naive and too idealistic and too much in favor of an overhaul of the system. In many ways, we do need an overhaul, right? Like in the U.S., getting money out of the political system, having a government that actually represents us, stopping all the wars. Like, yeah, the system does need an overhaul, but not to the extent where you try to reinvent the wheel and take all the things that have worked in modern societies and say, yeah, fuck that. Let's try community ownership of everything and no state and yada, yada, yada. And look, maybe history at some point will show that I'm wrong. Long after I'm dead, maybe there does become some sort of a communal system, a stateless society that functions properly. I just don't see it today.